Well, I think that's our cue to start. The music's down. Hi, welcome everyone. My name's Kumi. It's so lovely to see you in the room. I know how tough it is to sort of come to events after work. You know, you've had a long day, you're juggling things, so we really appreciate you being here tonight and engaging in the conversation. One of the things we're really keen to do tonight is to have you involved in the conversation as much as possible. I think there's a lot of questions, a lot of curiosity around what's happening, so there'll be so many opportunities for you to put questions in to us, to the panel, and also be involved in a couple of polls, which would really appreciate you participating in. If you've got your phones available, I'll explain how all that happens. So you're here because, well, last year the Australian government introduced new laws that set the minimum age for using social media at 16. The idea is basically to protect young people from the risks and the harms that can come from being online too early. So platforms like TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat and Facebook will soon be required to have proper age checks in place and to keep any of that information safe. If those platforms don't do that, they will face serious penalties, and these changes will come into effect by the end of the year. They have been shaped, the legislation, from input from young people, parents and experts right across the country. Before we get into that, I'd like to acknowledge, of course, that we are on Gadigal land, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging. So thank you so much for being here. Now, I just wanted to mention that we will have a number of those polls going on tonight. So does anyone use Slido before? The sort of polling? Great. So we'll want you to pull up, we're going to pull up some information on the screen, but we want you to be involved in that. We'll pull the Slido details up there, and there's a login and the event. So hopefully that will come up soon, but that's where you can participate and with us and participate in that poll. So, one quick thing, how many parents are in the room tonight? Great, mostly parents. That's kind of exactly what we hoped for and wanted to see. So the first poll that we will want you to participate in is, do you think that a social media age should be raised to 16, as in until you're 16 you can't use social media? Has that poll come up? Yeah, that's what you do. So if you can scan your QR code there, that'll take you to Slido. And there's the number. You just put yes or no. I can monitor those polls throughout the evening. We will be asking actually a poll at the end of the conversation as well. So there's your first question. It basically is, should the age of social media usage be raised to 16? We'd be really interested to know what you think about that. We will be communicating those results throughout the evening. We can even pop it up on screen. There's some coming in already. That's fantastic. The other thing is that we really want your questions. So there'll be a number of questions put to the panel. There'll be a lovely discussion taking place. If you've got any questions that arise during the conversation, please pop them through to us. I think you can use the same screen. So you can pop any questions in there. If questions arise while we're chatting, please feed them through to us live. I can moderate those and I can feed them to the panel, and we can kind of have a really nice circular conversation. So thank you so much for being here and for participating. That's time now to introduce our wonderful panel. I'm joined by Associate Professor Amelia Johns from UTS. Thank you, Amelia. Amelia is the Acting Head of Discipline in Social, Digital and Social Media in the Faculty of Design and Society. Amelia looks at how young people tackle racism, misinformation and digital safety across social platforms. Also joined by Associate Professor Marian-Andre Rizzo from the UTS. He's the Head of Behavioural Data Science Lab. Basically, someone who does stuff that pretty much none of us understand, but he will explain it all to us in layman's terms. Professor Marian-Andre was the recipient of Academic of the Year at the 2023 Defence Industry Awards, and he looks at how we pay attention online, like how we're distracted or how we're not distracted, and how influence and opinions spread across the digital world, which is of course such a huge issue now. From Project Rocket, we're joined by Rosie Thomas, who's there on the big screen for us there tonight. Hi, Rosie. It feels like you're in the room with us. Rosie's the co-founder of Project Rocket, and that's a youth-driven social enterprise which is focused on combating cyberbullying, hate and prejudice. She's also an Order of Australia medal recipient. And we're also joined by Rana Ebrahimi. She's the National Manager at MYAN, which is the Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network. Welcome. She's a fierce advocate for migrant and refugee youth and an expert in social inclusion and humanitarian ethics. All of you in the room, thank you. We also have a number of people joining us online, so thank you so much for being with us, both in Australia and overseas. And like I said before, what we're really hoping tonight is to have a really practical and open discussion about what this all means. This is happening and what the landscape looks like and what it means moving forwards for us and particularly for parents and obviously for young children. Basically, the legislation will be around who can open accounts on social media platforms. So we're talking about TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. YouTube is different because you don't need an account to watch videos, but there will be restrictions around that, age restrictions and who can actually access material. So what I'll do is go straight to the panel. If we do have that video at any point, we can go back to that. Amelia, I might talk to you first. This is a world first decision. In your mind, what do you think led to this decision?
Well, look, what led to this decision was the concerns of parents, and certainly I think that the discourse and even the current discourse is led by concerned parents and the regulator, both of whom are concerned with protection of their children, with online safety, but not necessarily taking a balanced view whereby there might be a consideration of how young people are using social media, have used social media as an important source of social connection, social support, identity formation, belonging, youth advocacy, young people having a voice on the issues that impact on them. So I think that side of the equation has not led to the implementation of this ban. The implementation of the ban has been led, as I said, by discourses around risks to children on social media, children and young people. And I think in many cases, some of the risks that are being discussed are at the extreme end of the scale. I mean, even the Safety Commissioner was speaking recently in relation to the online industry codes about risks around pornography, extreme and violent content, suicide ideation, some of these things that I'm in agreement, no children and young people should have access to that content, but that is not the whole picture of what people are connecting with on social media and what young people are connecting with on social media. So yeah, I do have some concerns around the discourses that led to the implementation or that are going to lead to the implementation of this ban in December. Because I don't think it has necessarily been a balanced debate. And importantly, young people's voices have not necessarily been centred in some of those discussions either.
I mean, the government does say they did talk to a lot of young people and there was actually, quite a lot of support for, I think 74% or something support for some changes, some legislation. I just want to look at some of those stats, and Rosie, I might come to you. You talk to a lot of young people. I mean, some of the stats are, almost 3 in 4 children aged 10 to 17 have seen or heard content associated with harm. Over 50% have experienced cyberbullying, 1 in 4 non-consensual tracking, monitoring or harassment. I do take what you're saying. They're the stats that have been focused on, Amelia. But Rosie, just in terms of, what you hear, if you had to do sort of straw polls on stats, do you feel like there is a lot of concern for young people around their safety in this space, or do you feel like there's more positives than negatives in the space for them?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kumi, and thanks so much for having me, everyone. I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri country, so paying my respects down here in Naarm. Yeah, look, without a doubt, we work with, 2,000 students each week all over the country, and we're also informed by our National Youth Collective at Project Rocket. So there are 42 12 to 20-year-olds that essentially do co-research with us. They steer the direction of our organisation, and wherever possible, I'll be trying to elevate their views into tonight's conversation. As Amelia astutely said, we know the harms exist. All of us are actually dedicating really our professional lives to tackling these harms. I'll give you another stat. 1 in 5 young people report being excluded, threatened, or abused online. And that's not good enough, and it's completely unacceptable. But unfortunately, I think what we've done is we've wrapped up, or I should say, simplified this debate as a sort of good versus evil. And instead, we've erased all of the intersectionality that exists. And unfortunately, the way that it is that all of the harms and the risks are wrapped up with so many benefits and opportunities. And to jump off the back of what Amelia said there, we've spoken about the mental health benefits of social media, and we're not here just to understand the nuance of the way that young people use social media and the internet. We're not so much just talking about them accessing Headspace, a phenomenal youth mental health organisation on social media. Although I will let you know that 73% of young people reported that they do access social mental health support on social media. But what we're really talking about here is self expression and identity, and especially for young people who are already facing marginalization, it really is a lifeline to. That community connection and that pride in ways in which they don't have that access offline. I just want to elevate one voice at the moment. It's Lamissa. She's a 19-year-old young Muslim woman from Western Sydney, and she sits on our National Youth Collective. And she talks about the power of social media as a lifeline, the positive cultural representation, identity, pride, and community connection that she was able to tap into only via social media. We know this is true. A lot of the First Nations young people we work with, LGBTIQA youth who literally don't have physical spaces where they can show up and access support. So we've got a lot of unanswered questions here about how we can create these safe places for young people offline. But it's clear that, yes, the harms and the risks are massive online and we need to be addressing them, but not at the cost of young people's agency, their belonging, and their connection.
Thanks, Rosie. We've got already a lot of questions coming in, so thank you so much. I'll be getting to those. I'll be getting to those questions because there are already questions about what are alternative sort of third spaces that we can provide for young people, which I really want to get to at some point in this discussion. Ran, I'll just stick to where we are now. You are deeply invested in the migrant and refugee experience of these spaces. What are your insights into how they're used by young people?
So, very similar to Rosie, we have connection to almost young people in all across the country, all the corners. And our access through them, ironically, is through social media, especially those young people who newly arrived to the country and they are in regional areas far away from accessing to physical spaces. One thing that we are hearing is a concern that how they're going to pass that settlement process and to settle in safely, and how they can navigate the process in the country. For newly arrived, consider that around 20,000 people are arriving through humanitarian entrance only. And from there, historically, 12% of them are children in this age group. And interestingly, we already have lots of problems with helping them to navigate the system and getting in, because their parents do not know English, they become the parents, they support their parents to settle in, and they need this connectivity. And disconnecting them, we have heard through consultation that it's disconnection between them and the rest of the world. But consider that their connection is through, for example, Messenger in Facebook or Instagram, because they don't have a phone number, through the journey that they have to get to the country. So it's really tricky if we consider that how they are going to help their parents, how they are going to navigate the system. And also, we understand that it's a protection issue for them, because we hear a lot of racism and cyberbullying online. Even us as an organization are getting trolled all the time on Facebook, so we don't use Facebook. And we literally stepped down from X because of the situation over there. So we understand that, we cannot consider that this is the best platform, but also we need to understand that the diversity in the diversity exists is quite nuanced, and there are lots of consideration in putting a ban on social media that needs to be diverse and understand that the country is the most multicultural country in the world, the most diverse country in the world, and it's literally the matter of equity, that when it gets to implementation, how we want to make sure that it's equitable for everyone.
Marion, Andre, there's a lot of questions coming through about the kind of tech side of things. I'll just run through a few of them, but I wanted to kind of get a sense from you about, you know, how much of this digital world is able to be sort of trapped, and you know, you do so much work, like, you know, how much control do we think we have over what we see and what we, you know, we hear so much about algorithms, we hear so much about endless scrolling and the dangers to our health. But I think, you know, this is happening, that this ban is happening. You know, it's been also talked about, you know, limiting access until you're 16, not so much a ban, but sort of delaying access. So there's a few questions coming in that I think would be really helpful, as in, you know, someone said, you know, is anyone comfortable loading up identity to the internet? So there's kind of this age verification process, for example. And there's also this idea that, you know, will that sort of allow these platforms to amass huge amounts of data? So I think there seems to be sort of concerns about how this will happen and technically how it's going to work for these platforms to be held accountable.
Well, those are multiple questions there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let me start getting to some of those elements. So, first of all, let me start with the last one, actually. Are we comfortable letting the platforms amass that much amount of information about us? They already do. They don't need our IDs to know who we are. Actually, even from 2014, we started knowing that our online activity, our public online activity, is very revealing about us. It was the beginning of where we realized that inferential privacy is a real issue. We can predict about the users using only a couple of public likes that we put on online content. We can figure out things like gender, sexual orientation, preference, political preference, psychological profiling in the big five dimensions, but even things like whether your parents have divorced before your 21st birthday. So the fact that a lot of our personal information is out there in the hands of the social media companies, we knew that since 2014. And you know who else knew that? Also Cambridge Analytica. That's how it was built, on this type of inferential privacy. Now, so we can probably put a pin into the amount of information that the companies have on us. It's a lot more than we think. I wanted to come back to some of what we discussed, and I really liked Rosie's comment about how the benefits and the downsides of those social media are actually blended together. And I wanted to come down to some of the things that we know that are harmful. And there's increasing amount of data and studies that start coming up that show the downsides, particularly in terms of psychological outcomes. So we do know that, for example, the US Surgeon General identified that children that use social media more than 3 hours daily, they have double the risk of poor mental health outcomes. So just 2 hours a day. And then we do know that limiting social media usage to just 35 minutes already increases, almost doubles those outcomes. But what I found particularly problematic is that there's a very new study that comes out of the University of North Carolina, which shows that when children that check social media at least 15 times a day, they actually show, and I'm quoting, increased sensitivity in reward sensors and that leads to hypersensitivity to peer feedback. So where I'm getting with this, the proof is starting to be not only correlational, meaning that we know social media usage, and at the same time we see these poor mental outcomes. We start moving into the causal links, and the fact that we see changes in the brains of teenagers seems to be one of the arguments behind maybe putting a delay until the brain reaches a particular maturity level, and in this case, it was deemed to be 16 years old. You had other questions there.
Yeah,
Sorry,
no,
I went a bit on a tangent.
No, that's fine. So it's, I think, there's a lot of questions that's really interesting coming in, and it's as if one of us is sort of from the government and the E-Safety Commissioner's office, which we're not. So there's so many questions, I think, around how it will actually work, how will the platforms actually implement this? Like, do you have any sense of, I know the government sort of said it's like they're building a plane and flying it at the same time. Like, this is all happening very quickly. So in order to sort of get the technology in place, in order for it to actually hold social media companies accountable, is that actually possible to sort of see whether, you can't make an account, but someone might be able to make an account, fake their age, for example. There's a lot of questions coming in which we will get to around workarounds. Like it's obvious that there will be people trying to work around it. That's what happens all the time in any situation. But is it possible to restrict access in the way that it's been proposed, and can companies actually be fined up to, I think it's $50 million, if those rules are broken? Like, what's the technology around that space?
So that's probably the big issue here, right? But it's the question on everybody's lips. How are we going to be able to enforce the rules without giving the companies access to our ID documents? And there's been a trial, and yes, they are building the plane as they're flying it. There's been a trial, but there's a couple of families of approaches to do this. The first thing to know is that in the law, it is explicitly forbidden for the companies to request government-issued ID. So Facebook won't be able to request my driving license to check my age, period. That is not an option. So what are the options then? Well, there's a couple of families of options. The one that is probably currently most favored, as far as I understand, but the legislation does keep changing and the implementation changes also. One of the families is based on token-based identification. So essentially, the company, the social media platform, does not request for identification, but rather engages a third party, let's say another company or another entity, which specializes in identity and age verification. And this is not new. Anyone that had to take a bank loan, that the bank externalizes the identity verification to a third-party service that does it, and then only sends the bank the information that they require. So in this case, a third party would be verifying the identity in the name of the platform, and then would only transmit to the platform essentially a thumb up, yes, above 16 or below 16. Which then only transfers the problem from the platform to the company, but then the companies are domestically based or could be domestically based, and that's a different story. Then you have the families of approaches which are inferential, so essentially predicting the age of the individuals based on a number of things. It can be the way they speak, the way they look, the way they move, even the way they move their mouse. All of these put together, they can predict the age. But as with anything inferential, when you make predictions, you can be wrong. So any prediction will come with a confidence interval. So almost like in voting percentages, like voting intentions, they say 3% plus minus 1%. So it might be 15 years plus minus 1 year, which then comes with all kinds of questions. And then there's other more exotic approaches, even some of them based on blockchain solutions and other. Okay. But we're talking about exotic.
Yeah. What I might do is, I'm conscious this is talking about kids and a new world for them. So I think it'd be great to hear from a young person. We've got a video we'd like to play you.
The social media apps that I use are Snapchat and TikTok. And I normally watch content on both of them and talk to my friends. All my friends that I have added on Snapchat are people from my school and one friend that lives in the UK. As well as watching content, I also make some. That's only for a few people to see, people from my school. The kind of videos I make are just relatable things to me and my friends, like inside jokes and stuff. My mum had a rule where I wasn't allowed to get Snapchat, and I did break that rule, but I felt very excluded from my friends, how they all had the same app and I only was stuck with messages still. So there was a group on Snapchat that I was added to, and there was a person who added some very inappropriate content onto that group chat, and luckily I left before I could see too much. Through my friends, I found out that someone told their parents about it, and I was kind of relieved because I feel like they should have got in trouble about what they did and learn that they can't just send stuff to people like that. Yes, I think kids under 16 should be able to be on social media platforms, as I don't think it's up to the government to make that choice. It should be about the parents' choice, because I feel like this isn't really going to stop cyberbullying at all. Like, this is not the approach. I think they should make it so that parents have more realization about things happening online. Do I think this ban is good? No, I don't think it is. It is coming pretty soon at the end of the year. I think it's important for people my age to be on social media, because I think some people feel very connected to talking to people, because they might not have that real help of the outside world, and they might feel safer posting stuff online or communicating online. Am I worried of losing access? I do have a lot of followers on some of my accounts, and a bunch of streaks on Snapchat and TikTok, as well as a very high Snap score, and I don't want to lose that because that took a very long time to accomplish.
Rosie, when you hear that video, when you is this something typical that you hear?
Yes, absolutely. And so great to have some youth representation. The biggest thing we've heard from this debate, if you like, is that don't talk about us without us from young people. I can say, as a youth organisation in the mental health sector for 20 years, young people and our sector weren't adequately consulted. And I think these voices just show the nuance and the dynamic of these issues. Ultimately, though, and I think this is what this little legend was telling us, that ultimately bans don't build skills. Bans don't build empathy or resilience. Bans don't address the root causes that are human issues around division and hate. Bans don't build trusted relationships between adults and young people. And I think the biggest injustice of all of this is that, parents have been left over the last 15 years to carry this huge burden of online safety with zero support. And now have been lured into this false sense of security that the problem is fixed. But the problem, isn't fixed. We need to be addressing these real issues. And so I'm glad to hear that the ban is now being sort of framed as a delay, because if we simply switch off access until a child turns 16 years old, we risk handing them a whole world overnight without the skills or the empathy or the resilience to navigate it. Plus, they've lost all the benefits of, the incredible young people we know that are musicians online because of their social media, that have followers, that are creating their own social change movements like Project Rocket, that are tackling global issues like climate change by galvanizing literally millions of other young people using social media to call governments to account. So the real opportunity, I think, for the delay is to do exactly what this little legend has said, and that is really focus on education and design approaches that actually meet young people where they're at.
Amelia, given that this is happening, so it's tempting to have a debate here tonight about what should happen, what shouldn't have happened, what discussions should have taken place, but let's assume that this is going ahead.
Yeah.
How can that education of young people, how can young people feel, one, and parents, that they know how to navigate this new world? And also, do you feel like there will be other spaces that young people will find, let's say it is about activism or is about connection, outside of the social media spaces that are now going to be restricted?
Well, I hope so, Kumi. I mean, I guess the thing to think about here, you know, when you're hearing about young people and how important social media is to them in terms of their social connections and communities that they're building online, is that young people are not without agency. They're not without capabilities and skills in being able to find the spaces where they can make those kind of very vital connections. So I guess my hope is that alternatives will be found. But I don't think the resources are really there at the moment, because there has been such a focus on, you know, now implementing this ban or a delay. I mean, let's look at the language of the delay. You know, you're going to have young people who are perhaps coming into year 12 or their first year of university and are, you know, accessing social media for the first time, whereas they may have been able to have conversations with their parents about things that were concerning online, or with their friends and peers. Maybe they had digital literacy education at school. I think that there perhaps are less, or there will be fewer guardrails as they're coming into a time when perhaps they're becoming more autonomous and not relying on their parents or school, you know, kind of systems quite as much for these kind of forms of education. So, yeah, I think where are the resources going to be to create those third spaces? Look, I hope that young people will find a way to find those connections, but a ban is a really blunt tool, and it means that even young people now who have social media accounts, if they are not of the correct age, they are going to have their accounts deactivated. I'm pretty concerned about young people's anxiety, you know, levels of anxiety when their accounts are deactivated. I'm concerned about parents having these conversations with, you know, say they've got a 17-year-old child who's going to have their access to social media continue, and then maybe there's going to be a 15-and-a-half-year-old child who they're going to have a very different conversation with them. It's like, yeah, all of your memories, your connections with your friends, you know, community building, some of these really vital sources of connections are going to be lost. So I think that there is a lot of support that's going to be needed to be provided to parents to have some of those conversations. And young people, well, I don't think they've been centred enough in the debate so far, but certainly we need to hear them now, and there needs to be a lot of research that centres their voices and experiences, what their needs are, and that gives them the resources to be able to create those third spaces, perhaps with other stakeholders like Rana, like Rosie, you know, like people who are youth researchers and who are really concerned and interested to hear what young people need.
Rana, looking ahead, have you and your colleagues been considering how to manage that shift and that change, and what kind of support you feel like might need to be implemented? Particularly, I think, yeah, for those people, for those young people who have, say, built a community and a life online up until this point. Maybe it's going to be different for kids, say, under 8 or 9, but the ones at that older end of the spectrum, what discussions, I guess, have you been having around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So very similar to Rosie, we have that motto of nothing for us without us. And the conversation right now is, well, it is in the question that are we bridging the child rights? And beside that, because we are not considering the child's agency, and with that child agency, what we mean and how much of the agency we want to give to the children. For an organization like us, we say that definitely we need children around the table to create the solution, because they are innovative, they are creative. The Gen Z and Gen Alpha are the generation who were born in digital world. And as parents, the Gen X and millennials are not that much familiar with the digital world that their children are. They are already coding. And I stopped by Instagram. I didn't even get to TikTok. So I guess it's really important to bring them around the table to make sure that they can help us. And children and young people that we are working, at least, I know that they are value-based, they are right-based, they are quite passionate about working for what is right for the society, and they are eager to create something that can protect them. So they can be a part of solution, and they just need to they need adults to understand that and bring them to the conversation. And on the other side, I think we have 30% intergenerational gap. We have to address it in a way. And I think one of those ways of addressing is to teach the parents and to educate adults on the digital literacy as well. So it can be from children. Children can train them. So it needs something that will bring all of them together. It's not just the pure responsibility of a parent, and it's not pure responsibility of a child or a government. It needs to be a shared responsibility and a shared approach to address all of these in implementation.
Marian, Andre, what research do you have around, or have you read around, workarounds? Like, when there's bans, do people tend to use VPNs? Like, it's quite interesting anecdotally, and I don't know about parents in the room. If you've had conversations with kids, I know I've had conversations with young people saying, are you guys talking about how to work around stuff? And they go, yeah, of course we are. Do you have research around that space, around what kind of workarounds people might tend to be thinking of? Like, is that a sort of concern for you, I guess, or where do you think people will be turning to try and potentially keep access to communities that they feel like they will lose access to?
There will always be workarounds. Probably I don't want to indicate any here, but I guess it will not become as a shock that this legislation only applies in Australia. So any workaround that makes your access appear from outside of Australia will circumvent at least partially the problem. So yes, workarounds exist and they will always exist, but that is not where, that will not blunt, in my opinion, the effectiveness of the measure, because we have heard that the brunt of enforcement up to now was the parents. And any parent with a teenager at home will know the pain of trying to forbid their teenager to get on a particular platform, particularly if everybody else in the social group has access to that platform. And even in our video here, the young lady was saying that she was not allowed to have Snapchat, but she still got it because everyone got it, and she felt like she was missing out. So it is a form of peer pressure, and the fact that everyone is on it that is currently making the mission of the parents suicidal, almost impossible. But with the new law, there's two things that will happen. One, even if the law is only partially effective, we will start seeing those proportions of teenagers that will not be on social media anymore. Therefore, the pressure on the parents at home is going to be less, and therefore they will have more ammunition to fight. I mean, up to now, we could have said, no, you can't because you don't sleep at night. But now you can say, well, no, you can't because it's illegal. But then talking strictly about workarounds, the goal is not to necessarily have one effectiveness of 100%, but rather to introduce what is called friction. So all the platforms do in their design, and I wanted to talk a bit about the design, is they make actions easy. They make the action pathway easy towards a particular goal. And that's where the interface is working. When there's a gap or is a difficulty in moving from one point to another, we say that we introduce a friction. So if between the moment when I want to go online and getting online, I need to activate a VPN and reroute my traffic through some third-party country, which then limits the speed of the connection and then introduce all kinds of undesirable properties, you will lose a lot of users down that path because some don't know how to do it and others will just find that the new quality of the service is just not good enough, and therefore they will abandon it, therefore increasing yet the effectiveness. And talking now, this is the last point, and because you mentioned earlier about design of the platforms. Some of these platforms, they are designed to be addictive. That's not by chance. It's by design. There is the most addictive reward schedule. It's called intermittent reward schedule, which essentially means you take an action all the time and you get reward every now and then. And if that sounds familiar, that is exactly what pokie machines do. You pull the lever all the time and then the reward comes every now and then and you can't predict it. And how does TikTok work? You scroll up all the time infinitely, and every now and then you see something you like. It is the same design. It is a digital pokie machine. So if you feel you can't get your eyes out of TikTok, it's because, well, it's addictive.
Rosie, I want to put a question to you. Is, protecting our children and the addictive nature of scrolling, for example, we know that, but there's been calls for that endless scrolling to be coded differently within a lot of these platforms. I don't know if anyone's read Johann Hari's book, which is fantastic. But, when smoking came in, when driving came in, there's actually an interesting question here. I lived somewhere where kids as young as 10 were allowed to drive. When traffic and awareness around dangers increased, the age limit was increased, i.e. a ban. If we are talking about trying to protect young kids, and I know that you were saying in the beginning, a lot of this discussion leading up to this was around the dangers, is it not a good thing to protect young people from harm, from dangers, and perhaps say, look, until you're this age, we feel like this is kind of a good thing for your health. Like, we don't get you driving before you're 18. We ideally don't get you smoking or drinking before you're a certain age. You can make those decisions for yourselves. Is there not some positives to this?
Yeah, so Camille, first I think I'm a parent myself and I have a responsibility to protect my child as well. And I like that you use the example of driving, because driving isn't inherently bad for you, just like smoking or gambling is. And that's similar to social media. And so, yes, I don't think anyone is arguing that social media is a lovey-dovey, safe place that is just wonderful for their kids. No, it's harmful and it's problematic. And social media companies do have these sticky, harmful ways of operating that are unhealthy and harmful, and we need to address them. But in terms of having the most impact, to actually address the root causes, and this is what young people tell us, and it's what I hope for with my child too, is we want partnership, not protection. That, I genuinely, first of all, absolutely having the conversations with young people on a daily basis. Give me a rule and I'll break it, type teenage mentality. Yes, VPNs to mask the competition around finding a way to get around the ban, but also that the recognizing that unintended, we might think we're protecting young people, but we're actually sending them into all these parts of the dark internet that is so much more harmful and it's unmoderated. And so I just have concerns like there's no guardrails, there's no moderation, there's no supervision, and we're not even addressing the harms because we think we fixed it with a ban. So I think it's a poor use of, it's a short-sighted and poor use of our desire as humans, as adults, as parents, to protect our children, that we're better off addressing, digital literacy, as I said before, like building trust, building digital citizenship and building the capabilities that way, and putting a hell of a lot of pressure on social media platforms, helping governments regulate even further.
Rana, you mentioned some of the bullying and some of the situations that have occurred in your communities. What would be the ideal situation for you? Like, this is coming into place. We need to find alternative kind of spaces for these communities. How do you see this working? I guess, we need to look at solutions. I don't want sort of, say, parents leaving here thinking, oh my God, this is just going to get worse and worse and worse. I feel like parents already feel quite stressed about how much time potentially kids are spending online. There was an interesting comment here that came through actually, that we're focusing quite a lot on time spent online as opposed to content that we might be consuming. So, confession, my daughter spent a lot of time on her phone, playing games, doing all this sort of stuff. She's totally fine. She's matured into quite a lovely young person. But you know, I get the sense that, you know, we're not arguing here whether the ban should be in place or not because it's coming into place. So what would be the ideal moving forwards? How are you going to create a space and that digital literacy for the communities you're talking about?
Yeah. So I think there are lots of evidence around what we need to do and what is harm and how harm happens. And we need to look at the evidence. And then in implementation and design, it's interesting because when we do our market research, for example, to see how we can communicate with our community, which is young people from 12 to 25 and recently from 8 to 25, we don't get traction on Facebook. They don't look at Facebook. They didn't look at, we don't have a TikTok at all ourselves. So what they got the information from is majority from Instagram, for example, and from our website. So we were working with them. Recently, we sat together with young people and said, how can we get to you? And how do you want to, what channel do you like us to have a communication with you? So we were able, as an organization, to create that platform on our website to communicate with our young people. We have MailChimps for them. We have WhatsApp groups for them, which is closed groups, and they can have conversations with us. And interestingly, on Instagram, for example, we don't communicate with young people under 18. We never did. We always communicated with their parents and said, can you send a message that we want to meet or we want to have this project for them? So, and that was their suggestion because we need to have that ethics submission and consent from them. And I think whatever we want to create, it needs to have that consent from children. And it needs to create a safe space for them, especially from the diverse groups, LGBTIQ young people, the newly arrived young people. They really need a safe and closed space. They don't trust the open social media either. And recently, I had the conversation a few days before I come here. I had a conversation with an 18-year-old who is doing a research with us for her school. And she told me that she's Syrian, and when they arrived, she got her phone when she turned 16. But her sister, who is younger, got her phone and access to social media when she was 12. And she was saying that I asked the question because you wanted me from my 12-year-old sister. And she said, I don't care about the Facebook or any of the things that is on Facebook. I use the messenger to message my friends. Even we have heard online that the most important aspect of that, the whole social media, is the connection. It's not the primary idea of the Facebook, which was it is actually the primary idea of Facebook that you find your friends across the globe. So I think if we get back to the purpose and set it based on what young people want us and tell us what they're doing with social media, we can design something which is quite less harmful. Even it was 2 years ago, I think, that the Facebook removed our newsletters from their platform. And we had this argument between Australia and the Facebook. And everybody were actually supportive of Australian government that we want something national maybe. Maybe we need a national Facebook because we don't want the kingdom of Mark Zuckerberg control us and have this power over us that is removing our newsletters. So I think it's not that people are against, especially children and young people are against the ban, but it's the factor that how we are going to implement this policy.
Okay.
And that's the sensitive part.
I want to ask one more question. I might ask you, Amelia, and then I want to move on to quite a few questions that are coming in around. There's actually some really interesting stuff coming in around, come on, just get out to the park and play, and there's other ways to connect. And someone said, use Gmail, send emails, send letters to connect. It's really interesting to hear the stuff coming in. So I'm going to get to those. Amelia, I have a few questions coming through around digital literacy. then maybe there needs to be more digital literacy for parents and for kids, but, you know, can such an education actually be enforced? That seems to be a huge aspect of this. You know, I know that you do a lot of research around young kids, how they're feeling about their digital literacy, but should we be looking at digital literacy as a much more fundamental part of not only children's education, but parents as well?
Yeah, definitely, because even if there are concerns around risks young people are encountering on social media, we know that the social media ban isn't a silver bullet. We know that it isn't a ban, it's a delay. So young people will be accessing social media at some point in time. I'd like to know how, well, of course, schools teach forms of digital literacy, but in research that I've done with young people from migrant backgrounds, it's often young people encountering risks online, like maybe, you know, ideologies around toxic masculinity or something like that, or encountering forms of misinformation and disinformation online, and working out with their peers, you know, online about, oh, okay, I can't trust news on this particular platform. Maybe I'm not going to be accessing news on this platform anymore. I'm going to you know, go to the source and perhaps leave this or some of the platforms they're engaging with as a place for playfulness, for connection, etc. So young people are kind of learning digital literacies and digital safety strategies through encountering forms of harm at the lower end of the scale online. I think that needs to be facilitated. Even somehow working around the ban to have some of those contents that young people are encountering online and developing their own safety strategies and literacies to work with that reality, because that is the world online. There are risks in, you know, the world that is not, you know, on social media as well. And risk is an important part of young people's development. It's how they learn agency, it's how they learn autonomy, how they learn to think critically. So digital literacy is very important, and multiple stakeholders, again, as Rana mentioned, are really vital here. So schools need to be involved in this, youth organisations need to be involved in this, parents need to be involved, young people themselves, like, you know, I think co-design is really important in terms of coming up with digital literacy resources as well, because in research I've conducted, young people felt that the digital literacy education they got in schools wasn't relevant to them because it didn't deal with the sort of risks that they're negotiating on social media, for example. Often it's dealing with static websites and is this fake or is this real news, kind of, you know, and they felt that that was really a bit beneath them, like that it was a bit basic in terms of some of the complexities around disinformation and misinformation on social media. And again, if, you know, that is an important part of young people's development. So if there is this delay, we're definitely going to need digital literacy education in schools that does focus on social media. We can't just like pretend that that doesn't exist and go out in the backyard and have a game of cricket and you'll be fine. Those risks are still going to be there. When they're able to have an account and when they're going to be able to navigate social media. So, yeah, I think it's important to have those guardrails in place.
Mariette, Andre, is there an ability for platforms like Instagram, for example, to release, there's an interesting question around that, to have a variant of their app which doesn't allow, for example, infinite scrolling?
Yes. Yes, they control it. They build it from scratch. They can do whatever they want. They could do versions for kids. They could tweak their recommender system not to recommend toxic content. But the question is, what would be the incentive for that? So, for example, it is known for a while that TikTok recommender engine would recommend to teenagers harmful challenges, things like the blackout challenge and other really dangerous activities where young people, well, they consume the content and then they film themselves performing these dangerous acts, sometimes leading to death. But they've not done anything about it because any intervention onto their platform design will reduce the engagement, which then will lead to less advertisement and less funding. yes, they can remove the infinite scroll, of course. Infinite scroll is a new thing. It's rather new. We talked here about the history of social media platforms. Depending if you consider Reddit a social media platform or not, we had initial forums where people talked topics, but then we moved into Facebook where we started searching our friends, and it was all friend-centered. And then TikTok and Instagram changed, again, the paradigm where we are no longer connecting with anyone. We are just consuming infinite amounts of content, which is dictated not by anyone, but by a recommender engine designed to keep us there for hours. So could they change it to make it safe? Sure, they can. They can also reduce their own income at the same time.
Okay. I want to, because I know there's so many parents in the room, I'd like to just shift the discussion briefly to some parent questions that have come up, and then I'd love to look at the poll, where we're at with the initial poll, because we're also going to do another poll. Rosie, there's a lot of questions around how parents sort of communicate with their kids around what they can access and what they can't. Do you have parents talking to you around concerns around their children or positives? Like, I'm glad that there's something here because we've been trying to fight this at home on our own, and we actually feel like at least, you know, there's some recognition that some of the stuff that our kids might be looking at is harmful. Like, are you hearing both sides of that from parents, and then therefore how they can communicate to their kids about what's going on?
Yes, absolutely. And there is so much pressure on parents, which is why this delay just seems so irresistible because it feels like it's going to fix those problems. I think, you know, what we're hearing as well is similar to what Amelia said, is that we need to start having these conversations now as early as possible, because there is a potentially arguably a fallout or a transition for when young people are being removed. A lot of the time, a lot of younger teenagers, for example, might not be thinking in the long term about what is going to happen on December 10 when this law comes to effect. They might start thinking about it a week earlier, for example. So I think like starting these conversations between parents and the kids now is really important. It's a great excuse that you attended this thing. And I also just want to commend every parent that is here, because it's you parents that are really leading the way. And I hope you have these conversations with the parent friends that aren't here. I guess some advice around talking about this stuff, because I feel the panic and fear too, despite working on these issues for the last 20 years. I think it can be really, really hard to suspend our fear and panic and also our opinions when it comes to talking about this stuff. But my biggest hot tip that we hear works really well with parents and their young people is to just try and approach the conversation with curiosity and judgment. So rather than leaping to conclusions, or even rather than having a conversation a little bit like the one we're having about whether we're pro ban or anti ban, let's just talk about the issues. Don't be afraid to talk about the things that you've seen online that you didn't like. And especially, don't be afraid to say that you didn't know what to do about it. Because I actually find that it's in those experiences where we show our imperfections as parents that really open up the conversation and build that trust. So together in that scenario, you can problem solve what you could both do in the future when you see hate happen online, or you can problem solve some tactics or strategies for when you might want to use social media and no longer be allowed to. You'd be so surprised about how this approach of talking about your own experiences really opens it up for young people to do the same. And I think ultimately that is our goal here as parents, is to be a safe, soft place to land for our kids. One thing I wanted to add here, because parents, you're not alone. You know, Project Rocket and so many other organisations will be here to support you, and there are phenomenal researchers that are doing research right now to support you. One of those organisations is Young and Resilient Research Centre from Western Sydney University, and they just released fascinating research around the impact of social media on families and their attitudes and perspectives. And actually, the good news is they found way more in common between parents and young people than not in common. So they've found that both parents and young people recognize the benefits and the risks, but they prioritize them differently. So if this helps going into your conversations with your young people, the research showed that for parents, the focus tends to be very much on the harmful content, the impact on mental health, and boundaries like screen time, which is probably no surprise to anyone. And for young people, the focus for them is, connection, identity, creative learning. And for them, what they say is they really want guidance in those areas. So the study also showed that too much monitoring can actually backfire with kids feeling really spied on. And of course, they find ways around it. But I think, at the heart of it is that young people, even though it's really hard to start these conversations, are looking for guidance and partnership and support and skills. They don't want to live in an unsafe world. They don't want to see hate and division. They recognize that they're not the experts of this, but it's that that's so hard to sometimes start the conversations between parents and young people.
Thank you. Because that leads me to one of the other questions here, which you've actually answered a lot of them, but to parents on the panel, what tips and tricks can you share about how to minimise harmful aspects and to build kids' positive online skills? Rana, what do you think about that? What can parents how can they help build those positive online skills? I know you're saying that a lot of the communities you work with, the kids are the ones who have got the online literacy and they're teaching the parents, but what would you say to that?
Yes, exactly. That's the thing. We hear a lot of parents who are worried because they're not familiar with the space at all. And there are a lot of unknowns around what's going to happen. One of the tricky questions I got a lot is that, are we going to buy many devices for them, and when they get to buy one device, when they turn 16, get another device, which is a lot of costs for many families, and they were worried about the cost of this process for the family as well. So I think one of the responsibilities that actually government can pick up is that investing in digital literacy for parents and investing to clarifying how it will look like specifically for parents. And one of the things that we can do, we usually are the bridge between the parents and children, and we navigate it together through co-design. So we bring them together and we ask questions in the way, or we ask parents to ask their questions from the younger adults and from children, and then we interpret it for both generations to understand it. So we can play the mediatory role, but I think a big part of it is also coming to the government and right now e-Safety Commissioner to provide this information as much as possible and clarify many things for the parents. Have town hall meetings, and bring parents together and answer their questions, because with the fear of unknown, we can continue, but as much as we get information, we can solve many things. And we like it or not, parents are not digital savvy. So even if we spend time on giving them information, right now they are struggling with navigating ChatGPT and all of these AI tools. So I wonder how much it takes time for a parent to just get to the speed of digital age and learn all of these things. But they can at least, as Rosie said, talk about the pros and cons and what happens when you get accepting code on your digital things. All of these processes, or what is good, what is not good, simply, is something that can be created through conversation. And everybody actually needs to address that together. It's not something that only parents work on it, or only children work on it, or only the implementers work on it.
Amelia, there's quite a few questions coming through, and I won't read them word for word, but quite a few questions coming through where I sense this kind of divide. There's no wonder they're called iPad kids, because parents have chucked them in front of iPads and they've just been on social media since the beginning. Why don't you just bring in sleepovers and phones like the good old days? Send your kids to the park. Parenting is about parenting and it's hard work, so don't complain. I feel like there's a kind of divide in a way happening here where we've got a generation or generations of young people who social media is what they've grown up with. Parents who have been trying to probably monitor that and manage that. And then kind of this is how we grew up, and there's no judgment on either end. But how do we bridge that sort of generational differences or differences of how we should be raising our kids? There is a lot of criticism often, just anecdotally, you see a kid in a cafe and they're on a phone or on an iPad and it's kind of like they should just sit there and draw. So what research do you find around that? Do young people feel like they're understood by parents? Do parents feel exacerbated by the fact that they can't get their kids off the devices? Because there seems to be quite a lot of commentary in that space coming through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a youth researcher, so I centre the voices, views, needs of young people. But in a recent research report, I was interested in looking at the differences between adult stakeholders, so teachers, educators, people from youth services, policymakers, the views that they had on digital and social media as a technology, and then the views that young people had in terms of what meaning it had, what importance it had for them in their everyday lives. And again, you really saw these differences coming through where adult stakeholders are like, there tended to be a bit of a fear around technology full stop, social media being something that they thought was harmful, but the next debate is obviously going to be around AI and AI companions. It will be the same debate. And I think that the reason for that is that young people think, I grew up, I had these fantastic experiences and my kids are missing out on what I had. But I don't think there's always a lot of attention that might be given to the forms of creativity and play and the discoveries, the excitement of young people engaging in these really, different worlds that are being created, that they're co-creating in some ways through digital media, through social media. It's almost a sense like they're not doing what I used to do to get enjoyment, and I don't really understand it. But I would encourage, I guess, to get past that generational divide. I would encourage certainly parents to speak to young people, not only about risks that they might be exposed to through social media or through digital media or through games or in interaction with Gen AI, but to ask them why are you talking to an AI chatbot for this many hours a day, or why is it that you're connected to social media? What is it that you're doing? What are you getting out of it? Because I'm pretty sure that all parents in the room had similar conversations with their parents where their parents may have been disapproving of a certain kind of music that they were listening to. Maybe it was television as screen time that their parents didn't necessarily agree with. We've heard a lot of these kind of debates around every new technology that comes in. It's bad because young people are glued to it and they're not doing what I used to do. But I really do genuinely believe, and I think that many of us here believe, that young people are forging important connections online, doing, their creativity is being encouraged, they're, engaging in forms of play that might not necessarily be the same as what their parents experienced, but still very important to them, very important to their peers, important to their social development. So I think in some ways it's about a bit of give and take. Maybe these kind of really hard positions that are taken, there needs to be a softening of that. I think Rosie mentioned this, having a soft kind of understanding of why is it that you're engaged in social media for this many hours a day? What are you doing? Why is it important to you? Some of those conversations I think can help bridge those barriers and bridge that gap.
Rosie, questions that come up often, and one's actually come up here tonight is a parent worrying about their son finding a sort of sense of masculinity through extremism and sort of hateful spouting of views online that don't represent the majority. Is there a positive to there being limits to what that young person can see online and their views being formed in a more regulated kind of majority space, not through social media platforms?
Yeah, I think one of the most harmful outcomes that, rightly so, we're spending time talking about at the moment is the manosphere. The idea that online spaces can be luring, young men, teenagers in, and through benign sort of messages around going to the gym and getting fit and being your best self, but ultimately leading to much more sort of violent ideologies like misogyny, for example. And then, of course, with those addictive features that we've been speaking about tonight, it's this idea that young men in particular can get trapped in this space. And we also know that there are additional challenges with young men and when it comes to mental health and accessing support that are unique, actually, to young men that are quite different to girls and the way that they relate to one another in their social settings. So, without a doubt, this isn't a massive concern. And there are some amazing organisations like the Man Cave and Movember who are addressing this work. If you're actually a parent in the room and you're concerned, I really recommend you checking out those organisations. So absolutely, but I guess with what we've said tonight, and maybe one additional piece of research I want to layer in is that at Project Rocket, we actually recently did a study with 500 young people aged 13 to 15 about the impact of social media for them. It's called their online realities, essentially. And we found that most teens, so 44% of teens reported both positive and negative experiences online. 41% report only positive experiences, and just 3% report only negative experiences. And I'm absolutely not dismissing that small group and the problems they face, and especially when we're talking about really extreme issues like the manosphere. But I think it really does emphasize just to calm the farm, I think, in the room as well, that, that there's a lot of fear going on at the moment. And hopefully these conversations or this delay is going to have a really positive effect where we start having a springboard or an entry point as parents, as schools, as governments to actually be intervening on these really insidious issues that are impacting young people.
Thanks, Rosie. We're just going to pull up the poll and see where we are at. There were nearly 100 votes for that initial poll. And I'd just like to discuss those findings. So, has our opinion shifted? Can we just look at the original one as well? That would be really great. Looking at that age. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Basically, should we be restricting the access? I'm not sure where the results are there. I can pull them up here. Basically, majority was for that age restriction. So I think it's really important to talk about that because on the panel here, we're sort of looking at this is not going to be great. We're going to restrict access for young people, these communities that they're going to access. But when you say look at the poll, it's kind of like bring it on. So how do we address that? The reality is there's at least in this room, there's a sense of, this is actually, let's limit the access at least until a bit older in life. There was actually an interesting, if we go back to that car driving analogy, it takes a while, you get a license and you drive when you're older. There was an interesting, comment here about saying, when young people go to access social media, especially young girls, should they do some kind of test to know that they understand how to use it properly and what the harms might be? We do a driving test when we get in a car. Should there be something like we do a test before we access social media? So I'm just trying to reflect the poll there. And people's views haven't changed that much. So what does that tell you? That there's still, there is support for these restrictions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd be interested to ask every single person in this room why. Why the social media ban is so important to them and why they think it is, going to address these online risks and help, their children or young people in their lives.
There's a lot of comments around data privacy, leaking of information. There seems to be a sense, a valid sense that our information's not safe, that the content we can maybe see is not necessarily safe. So amongst all the very valid kind of opinions here around, young people need these spaces, this is their way to communicate. There does still seem to be quite a sense of, this is actually maybe a good thing. So I think that disconnect, or not even disconnect, but that is actually important to kind of look at and chat about as to why we think that might be.
Well, it's related to your initial poll when you said how many parents are in here.
Yeah.
Most of the room put up their hands. And then it talks to what Amelia said about the disconnect between the generations and what people fear. So parents want safety and parents are here. So.
Okay. I mean, Rosie, what would you say to that?
Well, I feel so motivated. Like I'm actually itchy on my chair now because I really want to bridge this divide. And I think I'm really privileged to come from a space where I get to work with young people day in, day out. And we deliver digital literacy programs in schools. We deliver anti-bullying programs. We've externally evaluated them. We know they're effective. And so I think when we know that there's this solution here, but it isn't being rolled out at scale, it isn't being funded. As Amelia said, digital literacy is being left up to young people as peers to sort of fumble their way through it with scars and battle wounds at the end. For parents who understandably have been given no education, no training, no support, but expected to hold the burden, I'm not surprised that this divide exists, but I feel really motivated to close the divide. And most importantly, I feel so motivated to be part of a conversation that brings together young people's views and their experiences, their strengths and their struggles, and the potential that they have to a room where parents can get to see that. Because maybe we just get to see parts of young people, and especially on social media, that perhaps parents just aren't getting to see.
We've got about 10 minutes or so I'd love to spend the next 10 minutes. We all accept this is happening. We've all looked at the concerns. We've all looked at the positives. We've sensed that, particularly in this room, there's a real sense that this is something that maybe parents feel like might be supportive for them in this sort of social space. Rana, if there was one thing you could sort of say around from December, when this ban comes into place, to kind of not reassure, but say, look, this is what's happening. This is what we're going to do to support parents and children through this. This is the practical way in which we are going to navigate this transition. What would you say?
Well, I totally understand when we always kept it 50-50 until it got to the implementation. But I definitely think it needs huge investment on how we are going to implement it. And again, I said it before, I think definitely co-design is the way going through. And it's not just, I really don't like to see it. It's just the parents' responsibility to go and navigate it and understand it. And I don't want it to sit on the lap of the parents to have another responsibility adding to all of their responsibilities. I think it's a shared responsibility. As long as we do it in a shared way, I think that's the best solution.
Amelia, in terms of all the research you've done around young people and how they feel when they navigate the digital world. What do you think young people need to be navigating that digital world, this new digital world in a way, and make them still feel connected to their peers and to their communities with these kind of guardrails that will be in place?
Yeah, I mean, my motivation is always to do research with young people to see how they're navigating this new landscape. It's a completely new landscape for them.
So what questions, I guess, if you look 6 months down the line after the ban, what questions will you be asking young people to fill your research pot?
And well, I would love to do that research, and I would like to hear what their experiences are of digital exclusion, because we talk a lot about, you know, the inclusion of young people, of their voices, how important it is, you know, for them to participate in the issues that matter to them and to have a say in them. I feel like that's what I would ask them. I would be asking how they're dealing with, you know, the ban 12 months on. Has it been positive for them? Have certain risks, you know, diminished? Or do they feel safer? These are the things that I would ask them, but I would also be really asking them, you know, is there a sense of something that they have lost? Are they trying to find new ways to forge those connections again that may be lost once their account is deactivated? How are they doing that? In which setting? Are they doing it in local neighbourhood setting through school? Are some of those opportunities for voice and for having a say on things that matter to them being provided more so in the school environment? Because often in research I've conducted with young people, social media is the space where they can advocate for themselves, have a voice in a way that, you know, and I do research with young people from migrant communities as well. In terms of them advocating for themselves, sometimes it is on social media, because the mainstream media may, you know, speak about them, about the communities they belong to, but may not touch upon their lived experience. You know, the debate that happens debates that happen in mainstream media may not be balanced. So in some ways, how are they going to be connected with, for example, research that I've done has shown how important it is for opinion leaders on social media or influencers on social media that come from young people's communities, that speak to their lived experience, what they have to say about issues, news and information that may be shared through those channels that they're not going to access otherwise. You know, are schools going to step in and perhaps allow for this kind of broader, more diverse debate around, you know, young people's voice, the issues that concern them? Is that space going to be opened up within the school environment? Because at the moment, schools also are very focused on risks and on restricting young people from being able to, from engaging with things that may cause harm, or that may cause the school, you know, reputational damage even. I mean, is there going to be a little bit of risk-taking from schools to provide that space for young people that may be lost in terms of the online environment?
Rosie, do you think there could be some positives that maybe, I'm not saying you haven't considered, but look, maybe if you did a poll of young people in 6 months' time after the ban, do you imagine that some may say, oh, look, I'm actually been feeling less anxious. I feel like I'm comparing myself less to others. I don't feel like there's as much bullying as I was experienced. Is there room for those kinds of questions to come into this space? Do you think that there might be some sort of knock-on effects that maybe we don't know about yet?
Oh, yes, absolutely, Kumi. In fact, young people, not all young people are against a ban either, because young people aren't a homogenous group, of course. They, you know, have a rich intersectionality of different experiences and identities, and some are for the ban for those very reasons. Typically, what we have heard from the young people that have said that they're for the ban was more, yes, but the other kids will get around it, or they'll just go to other places. So for me, again, it comes back to those practicalities. But look, I'm hoping that there will be positives. As I said before, what I want to see is mandatory digital literacy education in schools. So I hope that this delay, because we are bracing ourselves for the fallout with schools and young people and, parents, in dealing with, the flow-on implications, the unintended negative consequences of this. But my hope is that this does crack open conversations, that it does hold social media platforms more to account. I mean, I don't want to stifle the good things that they are doing, like, for example, Instagram teen accounts, which they introduced before there was even talk about a ban, that did bring into effect some of the features that the ban is hoping to bring into effect anyway. So I'm really hoping, though, that we can start to work together, because we need to move away from this division and debates and polls for and against, and instead actually prioritize young people. Because when we treat them as empowered citizens that are capable of being agents of change in their own lives, and when we give them the tools and the skills, and we create school environments that allow them to be who they are and meet them where they're at, then young people can tackle online hate. That they can navigate the harms, and they can experience the benefits and become leaders and have positive relationships and positive mental health and loads of resilience, because they've navigated the risk, that they've been exposed to some level of risk. So I don't think that, I think in 6 months' time we'll be reassessing this thing again, because I just don't think it's going to work. But I'm hoping that what comes next is something that is a bit more applicable, practical, and actually values young people as citizens.
Finally, I think I just want to maybe balance out all the questions so that I make sure I've asked everyone everything. Maria-Andre, if you look 6 months down the line, you talked a lot earlier in the panel about those known harms, the addictive nature of social media and such. If you look 6 months down the line, do you imagine data research that comes in where perhaps there is a different level of freedom that younger people might be feeling around that space because they're not as glued? Do you feel like there's going to be some disconnection? Where do you think that data will kind of point?
We already have indications via studies where they've looked into people reducing their connectivity to digital environment in general, but to social media also, and always unanimously these studies, they show that once we reduce the connectivity, once we reduce the inflow of information, then I actually have it here. 90% of the participants showed improvement in at least one psychological outcome. So
they showed improvement in
at least one psychological outcome.
Okay, so reducing the connectivity, they showed
reduced connectivity leads to improved psychological outcomes, and I can actually attest to that myself. I have my own proof. A couple of years ago, I was on holiday with my family when I managed to drown my phone. Just a long story, but the result was half a holiday without a phone. The home was also home. And I have to tell you, that was the best half holiday that I've had in such a long time. The only thing that I missed was the ability to actually call my family when I got lost in the supermarket. And that's why now I have this. Does anyone know what this is? And this is my right to disconnect. So I think there will be good outcomes.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. Rosie, for joining us from Melbourne, thank you so much. Rana, Maria-Andre, and also to you, Amelia, for joining us, and to you all for your questions and for your input. I didn't get to all of your questions, but I hope that I kind of addressed some of them in the room in a sort of bunch. Look, there are resources available online, so we're looking at a few months away. If you go to the E-Commissioner's sort of website, there's some FAQs up there, like what will it mean? How do I talk to my kids about it? You know, how will the technology work? One of the things I do want to point out, which I think is one of the concerns that some parents have had, is, you know, if you and or your kids who are under 16 do access platforms that you're sort of not meant to, the onus and ban and the fines are on the social media companies, not on the parents and not on your household. So there's some quite interesting questions there that you can have answered if you do have questions around that. I understand there'll be some announcements soon in the next few months because there's obviously still some delays around putting in the technology around how it's actually going to work. So there's a lot still in train, but I really appreciate you guys having the conversation tonight and for you guys also participating. So thank you so much.